This weekend in Atlanta, Georgia, Alcoholics Anonymous is holding their convention. Something like 100,000 people are attending. And for 80 years, Alcoholics Anonymous has done a wonderful service helping people recover from the disease of alcoholism and being spared an alcoholic death. And if you know the first step says, of the 12 steps, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Underneath that is the spiritual principle that Paul is articulating in that our second reading from 2 Corinthians. When I am powerless, then I am strong. In weakness, God's power is made manifest. Now, when you first tell an alcoholic you're powerless, they feel absolutely cornered. So I'm powerless, I'm helpless, what to do next? Well, you have to go to the second step. The second step says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 2 is an act of faith. And as Paul says, disconnected from faith, then our weakness is just that, weakness. But once we have faith, we are given the power of God himself. Paul understood that quite well. In the gospel, we see the people of Nazareth not having any faith. And in a way, it neutralized the power of Jesus. He was unable to do anything there to help them because of their lack of faith. Though they were weak, they couldn't connect their need for faith. You know, Jesus goes to his hometown, and he doesn't receive a warm welcome. But, you know, most preachers can remember the first time they stood up to preach in front of their own parents, their own families in their hometowns. And, you know, it's not the same as with other things that people do. If you're a musician, they probably heard you practicing when you were little. If you're an athlete, they probably saw you playing in the backyard. I remember when I said my first Mass in the parish where I grew up. It was a very large, super large church, and the pastor was one of the auxiliary bishops at the time. So I was feeling really good about this whole experience. And when the bishop got up to introduce me, he said, we're really happy to celebrate this first Mass, and you all remember Johnny. And that kind of cut me right down the size. Here's Johnny. For them, I was always the little boy. Well, you know, preaching is something dangerously public that emerges from something intensely private. So parents and others who have known you growing up are inclined to be a little uncomfortable, even embarrassed, both at the revelation of something so deeply personal and it being waved around in front of their neighbors. Everybody is a little bit vulnerable at a moment like that. Now, multiply that a bit to allow for the fact that Jesus' message was very different. He wasn't just another synagogue preacher telling people how to obey God's law, offering God's hope for the future, explaining from the prophet something about when the kingdom would come. He was saying on his own authority, the kingdom was coming then and there. Where he was, the kingdom was. And if there was any doubt to that, he was doing things that demonstrated that fact. But as we hear in the gospel, in Nazareth that day, there was doubt. And so Jesus didn't do very much in consequence. Hence, we're told Jesus was not able to work any great miracles there except for curing a few sick people. You know, there's a mysterious connection between healing and faith. Lack of faith, it seems, hinders Jesus' power. An important message for all who try to preach or to live the kingdom. If even Jesus was thwarted by the lack of faith of those around him, we shouldn't be too much surprised if we don't seem able to do what we think we should. So, rather than the people of Nazareth taking pride in a local boy makes good, they just outright reject him. He's too familiar, and they think they know him just a little too much. Well, in many ways, by comparison, metaphor, our hometown, the United States of America, is in many ways the hometown of Jesus. After all, our country was first settled so that people could worship God as they desired. And integral to the framework of our founding documents, the values of the Bible are weaved all throughout our laws. True, the United States was not founded as a denominational country, but the preeminence of gospel values is pretty obvious, especially to people throughout the world, that we uphold very biblical values here in our country. And so our hometown, much like Nazareth on that day, is finding Jesus altogether too much. It's really an outright rebellion against the gospel. And that lack of faith means that God's blessing will have a hard time being showered upon our nation, just as it was upon the people of Nazareth. And lack of faith is, all around us. And to the point where our values are even being used as a tool to silence us and even mock us. If you're familiar with Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, rule number 4 says this: make opponents live up to their own rules. You can kill them with this, for they can no more obey their own rules than the Christian church, can live up to Christianity. It's a powerful, powerful statement. And we find ourselves in position having our values used against us. And let me give you an example of this in action. Recently in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Art Museum decided to host an art exhibit that will feature a depiction of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI made from 17,000 colored little pieces of rubber. I don't know why they're colored, and this is by an artist who wants to destigmatize and normalize these little pieces of rubber, as if they already aren't. And she's doing it to counteract Pope Benedict's statement that he made several years ago on a trip to Africa, in which he said that monogamy and fidelity are the solution to the AIDS problem in Africa, and that other solutions make the problem much, much worse. Now, you may remember the Pope was mocked at that time for the statement. He was told it was unscientific and very moralistic, except that it wasn't. After Pope Benedict made those remarks, it was the subject of analysis by a man named Edward C. Green, who is the director of AIDS prevention research at Harvard. And he said this: in every country in which HIV infections have declined, the decline has been associated with a decrease in the proportion of men and women reporting more than one partner over the course of a year, which is exactly what fidelity programs promote, unquote. So what about those little pieces of rubber? Do they really work? Well, the Harvard researcher went on to say this: if AIDS prevention is to be based on evidence rather than ideology or bias, then fidelity and abstinent programs need to be at the center for programs for general populations. It's really ironic how those who trump science the most willingly abandon it when it does not live up to their ideology. So does this mean Pope Benedict was right? Well, yes, he was. Green also argued that empirical evidence supports the Pope, and even went out on a limb. Mr. Green was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a closeted conservative Catholic by any stretch. And he said this: we liberals who work in the field of global HIV, AIDS, and family planning take a terrible personal risk if we side with the Pope on a divisive topic such as this. Isn't that sad? Here you have a researcher, a scientist saying that his own people fail to follow the evidence and are more willing to expose people to danger than the truth. So despite the evidence that monogamy and fidelity save people's lives, people are still promoting a lifestyle that harms people, just so that they don't have to be associated with the teachings of the church. So this artist who made the portrait of Pope Benedict XVI is rather miffed because the church won't go along with her view of things. And funny thing is that those little pieces of rubber are available throughout public health departments for free throughout the country and have been so for decades. And yet the rates of HIV infection and venereal disease continue to increase. So we have to ask ourselves which approach is really working. Now, the Milwaukee Museum of Art, which is also a tax-exempt, not nonprofit like the church, but however, unlike the church, does get taxpayer money to use for its institutions and not just tax breaks. So I really think it should be ashamed of itself for using taxpayer funds, many of which come from tax-paying Catholics in Milwaukee, to mock the Pope. Yet, ironically, we're the ones that are being threatened with our loss of tax exemption. And the museum claims the exhibit was not meant to be derisive. Well, then what was it supposed to be? A love letter to Pope Benedict? You know, one of the museum's board of directors said this, quote, "It is a work that offends the Catholic Church. So be it," end quote. So be it. Really. Then why doesn't this brave man ask an anti-Muslim bigot to do a portrait of Muhammad woven with these little pieces of rubber? Would he have the guts to tell the Muslims that if they are offended, too bad? And of course, our friends at the New York Times published the photo of the work in question. And when they were asked why they wouldn't publish the Charlie Hebdo cartoons of Muhammad, they said they were concerned with things like insulting the Muslim family in Brooklyn. Well, what about the Catholic family in Brooklyn? Don't they count? And they also stated when they publish controversial photos of things like the Blessed Virgin Mary covered in dung or the crucifix in a jar of urine, Catholics don't react violently like the Muslims. So what is the message there? That we should all act like park apes or terrorists to express our disapproval? I point this all out because I think it's time we Catholics start having a lot more self-respect. You know, there were at least a few people in Nazareth that day when Jesus went home who had faith. Just because our country is rejecting Jesus doesn't mean that we should lose faith, back down, not follow him. You know, many of the people in Nazareth did get over their self-contempt and their egotism, but they only did so because others had faith and called them to follow. True, these are tough times. Anti-Catholicism is on the rise. We see well-educated people feeding the worst appetites of bigots and trashing elementary standards of decency. And I'm sure the disciples who remained with Jesus that day in Nazareth were disappointed to the point even of despair. And in light of our country's increasing hostility to Jesus and his gospel, we at times might be feeling a little of our own despair. But despair must be replaced by confidence in the truth. American Christians, men and women, need to put on our hard hats in the workplace, in our schools, in the political sphere, at home and at work. We have a society to rebuild. We have a mission to fulfill, but we can only do that if, like those few people in Nazareth, that Jesus was able to heal, if we have faith. And if we have faith, that faith can spread, just as it did from Nazareth throughout Israel, throughout the whole world.
Like what you just heard? Visit Our Lady of Mount Carmel's social media pages for more faith-filled content. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Read the OLMC Tempe blog. Your Catholic community is online. Let's stay connected.